So today we're here to protest our newly unelected Prime Minister of the Liberal Party, Scott Scummo Morrison. Appropriate response. My name's Hasha. I'm the National Union of Students Anti-Racist Officer, and I'll be chairing today's demonstration. I'd also like to acknowledge the land that we're standing on, which is something that ScoMo is pretty disinclined to do. The country that we're standing on is the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Their sovereignty was never ceded, and I think it's important as activists to always acknowledge that fact and continue to struggle for Indigenous rights. I think the news of a leadership spill had us all on a knife edge, thinking that hard-right, psychopathic, refugee torturer Peter Dutton would be leader of this country. Dutton, of course, as Home Affairs Minister, took cruelty towards refugees and asylum seekers to new heights, denying refugees medical treatment because they couldn't set a single foot on Australian soil. Children as young as 12 had tried to set themselves alight. They've been refusing to eat, drink, sleep. They can't even open their eyes, some of them. He used his training as a police thug to further marginalise and kick down the vulnerable. We've narrowly avoided that, but instead we now have Scott Morrison. Boo. Hard-right evangelical, who could forget that Scott Morrison was actually Immigration Minister himself under Abbott? Who could forget that he was the one who originally popularised the slogan, "Stop the Boats," as a slogan, but also as government policy? His Operation Sovereign Borders was designed to deter refugees from seeking safety here with the threat of hell on Manus and Nauru. A video explaining that refugees would never make it out of Nauru was played to the detainees there. On that night, 100 refugees tried to take their own lives out of sheer despair and helplessness. But of course, according to Scott Morrison, those social workers and others who reported this were just making it up. They're just playing to the cameras. And it was actually under Morrison's watch that Reza Barati was killed by guards on Manus in 2014. And then he turned around and blamed Reza for his own death. Shame. Shame. The funny thing is, the media want us to believe that Scott Morrison is a moderate. It's laughable. We're going to start off his Prime Ministership showing loudly our opposition and everything that ScoMo stands for. The Liberals are on an absolute warpath against ordinary people, against workers, students, refugees and Muslims and the climate, and we've got to stand up to them. We've got to expose them every single time they put their interests and the interests of the big end of town ahead of our own. Hopefully this can be the first demonstration of many that can put Scott Morrison and his cabinet on the back foot. So I'll have another chant. ScoMo, get out. We know what you're all about. Cuts, job losses, money for the bosses. ScoMo, get out. We know what you're all about. Cuts, job losses, money for the bosses. ScoMo, get out. We know what you're all about. Cuts, job losses, money for the bosses. All right, so our first speaker today is Imogen Grant. Imogen is the president of the Sydney Uni Student Representative Council, which is co-hosting this rally, so make her feel welcome.
Oh, thanks, yeah, I'm a shorty. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here today. I think what Harsha was touching on around sort of the bourgeois media putting out that ScoMo is some sort of triumph of moderation within the Liberal Party is absolute bullshit. It's something we really need to break down today. We know that ScoMo has built his brand off the back of torturing refugees, and that he was the architect of the boat turn-back policy. And this policy, apart from something that he enacted in 2014, is still going on today. And we know that the leadership challenge came as a 12-year-old girl in Nauru tried to set herself on fire, and another 17-year-old girl is in critical condition after refusing food and water. So ScoMo's sort of far-right policies, we know are no better than Dutton, his successor, or Turnbull's. The Liberals continue to cut penalty rates to privatise education, to screw over our public transport and to exploit workers. And there's no Liberal government that is an acceptable or moderate government in this country. So whilst one of the things we're seeing is that they're using racism, and this has been a thing of the Liberal government and of the Labor government, using racism to divide us and to, you know, make us look the other way as to sort of where the harms in our country are caused. So workers in Australia, they deserve a decent living and a future they can be proud of, not this far-right fear-mongering coming from the Liberal and Labor parties, whose support also extends overseas from Trump as well. And I think that's also something we can dwell on, because it's the success of the far right globally, particularly in the US, that is giving power and confidence to the Liberal Party at the moment. We know that the connections between Trump and Morrison are quite clear. It was Morrison that refused to condemn Trump's travel ban, and in fact encouraged other countries around the world to take up Australia's refugee policy. And it was yesterday that Donald Trump came out on Twitter and congratulated Scott Morrison for his new prime ministership. So, and we shouldn't forget that it's Donald Trump, his enormous rise to success against the odds. It's his complete racism that the Liberal Party looks to as a possible model to emulate. One where a party can be openly bigoted, openly homophobic, openly sexist, and can still receive sort of some semblance of support. But we know that the solution is to not vote our way out of this. But instead is to reignite the refugee rights movement. Social change happens from action, and we cannot vote our way out of it. Just like students did with fee deregulation. It was protest after protest, it was strikes, it was direct action, it was teaming up with workers on campus, and that is also a model for change which we can bring to this. We need to stand up for ourselves, because we cannot rely on the Shorten government to end offshore processing. We need to kick out the Liberal government, yes, of course. But we also need to build a movement based on attacking state racism, such that it becomes untenable for any party to continue these policies. As workers and students, we have far more in common with the people who are detained indefinitely in detention than we do with these ruling class hypocrites torturing them forever. So we don't want a stable Liberal government. We want a Liberal government that is going to fall at its hinges. We don't want, and so this sort of means joining us at the next protest. There have been direct actions and there have been protests over the last couple of days, and we need to keep that going on in the future. And I think the student movement here has a role to play. And there's a long history of students, no matter what their colour, standing up against racism, and there's a really strong history there. So I'm going to make sure that at Sydney Uni campus and across campuses across the state, that we build up a comprehensive movement against the Liberal government and against racist state policies. So I hope you're all here with me on this, and I hope to see you all at the next rally. Thank you very much.
Alrighty, I think we're going to do that popular chant from the start again. ScoMo, hell no! 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 Let's try another one. When refugees are under attack, what do we do? Stand up, fight back. When refugees are under attack, what do we do? Stand up, fight back. When refugees are under attack, what do we do? Stand up, fight back. I said, what do we do? Stand up, fight back. I said, what do we do? Stand up, fight back. When refugees are under attack, what do we do? Stand up, fight back. When refugees are under attack, what do we do? Stand up, fight back. When refugees are under attack, what do we do? Stand up, fight back. I said, what do we do? Stand up, fight back. I said, what do we do? Stand up, fight back. Awesome. So, yeah, well, I mean, Imogen covered a swathe of Morrison's crimes. The other crime, very significantly, of Scott Morrison is that he is a notorious hard-right Christian and homophobe. He is basically the same as Mike Pence, Donald Trump's vice president. When the same-sex marriage campaign was going on, he said that homophobes like him were exposed to hatred and bigotry. all the while him and his government had been denying for 13 years more the rights of same-sex couples to get married, a basic civil right. Scott Morrison also shown himself in his role as a social services minister and treasurer to be someone who's absolutely committed to fighting for his big business mates. He supported tax cuts for the top companies, for the richest companies in the country to get away with anything. And the burden for that will be borne by ordinary workers and the vulnerable who rely on welfare and healthcare services. He thinks that young people in this country who are unemployed or students are too entitled. And that's why he supported a huge wage cut in the penalty rate cut, the biggest wage cut to workers since the Great Depression. Shame. Shame. He also supported a cut in subsidies to the pathology sector, which basically meant that people have to pay more for their pathology services, making people put off vital testing. Shame. Shame. I think we should have a chant that reflects some of these issues. I think we should say, tax the rich, not the poor. This is what we're fighting for. Tax the rich, not the poor. This is what we're fighting for. Tax the rich, not the poor. This is what we're fighting for. Tax the rich, not the poor. This is what we're fighting for. Tax the rich, not the poor. This is what we're fighting for. We should also say, racist, sexist, anti-gay, Christian bigot, go away. 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 So next speaker now, we'll be speaking a little bit more about Scott Morrison's racism, his connections to the illustrious Trump regime, and also his track record on Indigenous rights. So welcome to Gavin Stanbrook, who is, I believe, out here somewhere, a young Indigenous activist here in Sydney.
Thanks, Asha. One of the things I find interesting when ScoMo, or how I'd like to call him, Scummo, and I think everyone should very much put that in their repertoire, was that the media had this idea that somehow ScoMo is a moderate, somehow this guy is, a bit better than all the other scumbags, all the other right-wing shitheads that occupy seats within the Liberal Party. ScoMo, a moderate. How absolutely insane does that sound? This is the guy who oversaw the most disgusting, brutal, oppressive regime of offshore detention that we've seen in this country for decades. Packaged by the Labor Party and carried by the Liberals, this man is a disgusting racist, and he has no interest whatsoever in bettering the lives of refugees as well as people of colour and oppressed people in this country. And I think that we have to call them out when they say that. We have to call them out when they try and paint this man as something different, as somehow someone who's not going to come out and not going to lead the attacks, not going to lead the charge on Aboriginal communities, on refugee communities. This man is an absolutely disgusting scumbag, and we know what he stands for. We know what he stands for. He's in the Liberal Party, for God's sake. In the Liberal Party. The same party in 2014 that cut hundreds of millions of dollars to Aboriginal services across the country. We saw the attacks on Aboriginal communities with the forced closures. This man stood for that then, and he stands for that now. Shame. And then we see the attacks on broader sections of the community, his homophobia. He led the charge on the question of trying to fight back the marriage equality fight. He tried to tell our community, LGBTI brothers and sisters, that they need to get back into the closet. This man knows who he stands for, this man knows what he stands for, and we are not going to put up with it. We are not going to stand here and think and accept that this man is somehow different. We know who he represents. He represents the 1%, he represents the rich, and that is who he's going to fight for. And so we need to organise, we need to collectivise, and we need to fight back. Because the reality is, it's only our struggle, it's only our resistance, it's only our protest, as Imogen said today, as Harsha said today, it is only us that is going to be able to stand up for our rights, that's going to be able to fight for our rights, and it's going to be able to push them back. Because we need to recognise that it's not just the Liberals, it's not just the far-right scum in that party, and the far-right on the fringe of them as well. It's the others in the Labour Party. It's others within that party who also represent a more softer racism, a more liberal racism, a racism that expects us to accept the oppression, to accept the bullshit, and go back home. And so we say no. We say no, and we fight. And we fight them now, we fight the Liberals today, and we fight the Labour Party when they come in a couple of months' time, and we tell them that if you think you're going to come in and continue the oppressive anti-refugee regime, if you think you're going to come in and continue the attacks on Aboriginal communities, if you think you're going to come in and continue whipping up Islamophobia, racism towards our Muslim brothers and sisters, then we're going to fight and we're going to put you back in your place, because it is us, it is our struggle, it is our resistance, and it's our power that ultimately will win. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Gavin. Well, one of the first acts, just hours after he was sworn in, as Imogen mentioned, was to invite cordially our overlord and chief bigot of the world, Donald Trump, to visit here, Australia, in November. Shame. It says a lot that this is the first thing that they want to align themselves with. And Donald Trump is quite happy with this state of affairs. He's using Scott Morrison, a man in his own image. He congratulated Scott Morrison on Twitter. I think Scott Morrison sees in Trump's border policy and Muslim travel ban a replication of Australia's own refugee policy. And that's exactly right. People like Morrison have been exporting Australia's refugee policy around the world. It's disgusting. I think we have to say that there's been a move to the right, and that's what Scott Morrison represents, and that's what we've got to fight all the way. So I just wanted to introduce now Isadora, who's an Enviro campaigner working for an NGO, to talk about some of Scott Morrison's crimes on the environment, some of the most famous crimes he's committed. Thanks, Isadora.
Hello, everyone. I think we would have been here rallying regardless of what had happened with the leadership spill, no matter if it had been Bishop, Turnbull, Dutton, they're all scum. And this is about the broader political situation at the moment, where politicians are continuously putting profits before people. It's disgusting. I just want to speak about Scott Morrison's history on his position on environmental policy. This is the man who was Treasurer at the time where he brought a lump of coal into Parliament and waved it around. It's laughable. It's shameful. This is the man that joked disgustingly with Abbott and Dutton about rising sea levels in the Pacific Islands. Shame. These people are at the front line of climate change. I dare say everyone in Australia knows the dire situation of climate change. New South Wales is 100% in drought. Parts of Australia are on fire, and it's the middle of winter. I just want to hammer home again that this situation would not have changed regardless of what leader we would have had. Scott Morrison is an atrocious human being and should not be our leader. No one in the Liberal Party should be our leader. And to be real, neither should Labor, whilst they're complicit, whilst they continue their complicity in environmental policy. The Enviro movement will not win by appealing to parliamentarians. Our tactics need to change. We need to stop thinking about individualistic action and start collectivising. Stopping use of plastic straws isn't going to change anything. Stopping the use of plastic bags isn't going to change anything. I'll be joining with comrades in a couple of weeks to walk onto the Newcastle coal port to do some direct action there, and I urge everyone to join us. Check out ACT UP on Facebook to get around it. Thank you.
Thanks, Izzy. So it's clear the Liberals are lurching further to the right, as I said, and we've really got to stop them. It's up to us, as Gavin said. Scott Morrison, I think we have to say you're on notice. We've brought down Abbott's government with student and community protests in the past, and we're not afraid to do it again. And we'll be ready, like they were in London, when your mate Trump comes to visit as well. Don't think you'll be spared at that point either. We've got to keep up the fight. Make sure you get involved with protests against the Liberals, for refugee rights, and against Donald Trump's visit later in the year. Especially because the media is determined to rehabilitate this guy, to normalise him, to say that he's just a great family man. He eats pies and loves the footy, so he must be one of us, they say. So we're just going to go on a small march up to Pitt Street Mall now to make our voices heard, and we'll continue the chants along the way as well. ScoMo, hell no! 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 Lock up ScoMo, throw away the keys. We won't stop till we free the refugees. Lock up ScoMo, throw away the keys. We won't stop till we free the refugees. Lock up ScoMo, throw away the keys. We won't stop till we free the refugees. Lock up ScoMo, throw away the keys. We won't stop till we free the refugees. Thanks, guys. Free the refugees! Free refugees! What do you want to do?
Get involved with the United Against Racism Alliance if you're interested in that.